Hi, everyone. Welcome to our RKD group Animal Welfare Think Tank for 2020. We're going to give everyone just a couple minutes to get logged in and have their audio set up and everything, and then we'll get started. I should have set up hold music for this.
I was thinking David could tell some jokes to the audience.
Ooh, David jokes.
Oh boy.
You don't have any good animal ones hanging around?
Well, I don't know. They could be a little dicey. I got the one about the digital person in the wood wall. Did you hear that one?
I have. I did that one.
Oh, that's where I got it.
Just give them one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Sure. I guarantee UPS will show up. Wild dogs barking.
Mm-hmm. It's an animal welfare meeting though, so dogs barking is more acceptable.
Commonplace.
David, do you have a dog in your lap right now?
No, actually, Stuart hasn't realized that I'm not in my usual spot on the conference call. So he's laying somewhere else, but I'm sure he'll figure it out soon enough.
All right, so we can go ahead and start. So just wanted to take time to welcome everyone and thanks for joining us at our first session for the Animal Welfare Think Tank on how to maintain disaster donors. If throughout the session you would like to ask a question, in your menu there is a question option and we will kind of pause throughout to answer anyone's questions. So feel free to use this option. Today we have Jen Thompson. She is Vice President for RKD Digital and she's here with us today. And David Miller, the Senior Vice President for our Animal Welfare vertical. All right, David will take it away.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning in some parts of the country. We appreciate you joining us. This is our 6th annual think tank, but obviously due to the circumstances around the world, it's a little different than in years past. So we appreciate you joining us today for this webinar. We'll talk more at the end about some of the other webinars we have for the remainder of the week, but we appreciate all you do and for joining us here today. But first, we wanted to kind of ask a quick survey question. So if Caitlin could pop that up. I guess the first question we want to ask, and I'm not sure if this is necessarily it, is have you seen a bump in your COVID-related donors so far this year, and probably since March? Caitlin, you have to let me know when this thing populates.
Yeah, I'm just giving everyone like 45 seconds to get their votes in. And then we'll pause it. All right. And then we will close the poll. So we had 89% people said yes, and 11% said no, that they haven't seen a bump in COVID donors.
Okay. Well, I mean, part of the reason we're actually doing this presentation is hopefully that 89% of you would see some. For the other folks, what we are seeing is a bump in donors giving to organizations. And so this comes from betterfundraising.com, and a lot of this information we'll talk about today is from disasters of the past and things that we've learned. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't say that this environment with COVID is a lot different. You know, with most disasters, you have a start date and then usually an end date. And so in my days of animal welfare in Florida, You knew the hurricane was coming, the hurricane came, and then the hurricane was gone, and you could kind of get back to some normalcy. This is a little bit different because we're not sure when the end date is or what that will look like. So, but we do think a lot of these principles will apply. So what we're seeing now in the first few months after COVID kind of hit in mid-March is we're seeing that bump. And we must say that some of the data that we're seeing are from your current donors that are giving more and more often, but not necessarily new donors. Some of those new donors are getting absorbed into what we're seeing on our other sister partner is the food bank side. We do expect that this may still trend as normal disasters would, where you'd start to see the slump as the economic impact may take its toll for some. Animals may be coming into the organizations that wouldn't otherwise beforehand, and then hopefully the surge and then some new normalcy. Again, these timelines vary. You see at the bottom where it says a few weeks, but normally, again, this is a little bit different because now we're already a couple months into COVID.
And your bump, if you have one, may be bigger if you did things like a COVID campaign. If you sent out some emails, included a buck slip in your mail, participated in Giving Tuesday Now. If you just sort of did your normal stuff, you might still see a bump just because people were out there wanting to help the charities that they help. But you'll definitely see a bigger bump if you took advantage of COVID and Giving Tuesday Now.
Okay, so another survey question for everyone. And this question really relates to have you or your organization been through a disaster situation before? So whether that's hurricane, fire, anything where you had kind of a brief disruption in your community or with your organization.
Flooding, super cold streak, tornado.
Now you're just all doom and gloom, Jen.
Well, you know, these sadly are the best online fundraising times.
We'll give them a few more seconds to answer this one, and then we'll close this poll.
And just as a housekeeping item, we will provide this full deck to you after all is said and done. Looks like the poll is split 50-50. Amazing. Well, obviously all of you are going through one right now, so hence the reason for this. But again, our goal is to kind of use what we've learned in the past and apply it to the future and give you some tips and tricks on how we can better retain some of these donors and the reasons why. Obviously, we want to pinpoint what's unique, best practices, and how we can apply those and some of the tools that we can help you with, or that obviously that you can incorporate into your own programs moving forward. So what makes emergency donors different is the fact that they usually are giving to the organization out of emotion, and not necessarily animal welfare, because we know that there is a strong tie to the mission or vision of what you do every day. But sometimes with flooding, fires, tornadoes, people from all over the country can sometimes swoop in and make a gift to the organization that will obviously be good for the organization at the time. It looks like a new donor on paper, but what we're finding is they don't necessarily play out as a consistent donor within your donor base.
And these donors, they may not be local. They might be seeing a news story, seeing you on the internet, and giving. For Hurricane Harvey, people gave from across the country to Houston Food Bank and SPCA of Texas. They came from around the world even. And so, you know, when you look at your donors, look at where they're from, because that's going to play a role in how you communicate with them later down the road as well.
And the difference between, you know, the COVID virus and just a normal disaster, and you can see from this map that you have a lot of things that are regional, as Jen was alluding to earlier. So most of the giving, we're not seeing people in Charlotte, North Carolina, given Cleveland, North Carolina, or Cleveland, Ohio, for example. We're seeing most of it local because everybody is impacted. And so that's where the big variance is in identifying some of these donors as well.
So David, everyone who said 50% they hadn't lived through a disaster must be in that Northeast or a little bit in the Midwest there.
Yeah, we can tell actually where you're from based off of the biggest difference of what we're seeing with a disaster-related donor is they don't necessarily convert or retain. And so although in 2017, again, this data is not necessarily as of this year because it's still happening, but 31% of households donated to some sort of disaster relief, but only 5% of them retained. So what that does to your file is it inflates the number of new donors or active donors and makes them look like you're growing, when in a sense the following year, if they're not engaged, won't give to you. And so you'll see a large drop off. So that comes into play not only when you're budgeting for the following year and when you're looking at projections for various channels, whether it be digital or direct mail or events or whatever you have wrapped around what this type of giving was. So it's important to understand they don't retain the same way unless they're treated differently. The survey says there's really only 3 things that can happen with these donors. And really they can give to you again, they can convert and you can engage with them and there'll be a donor or core donor as we like to call them. They may just kind of swoop in if there's other emergencies or times of need, or obviously the last choice, which we don't want, is they never return to give again. So the idea is to minimize and convert as many donors as we possibly can. So what can you do to help to convert them? And that's kind of what we'll talk about here a little bit.
So first, you got to identify your donors. There's several ways to do that, at least online. Is this their first gift? That's probably going to be in your database somewhere. But you want to be tracking what donation forms are they giving to, what emails, and you want to make sure in your email file that you can mark them and email them separately over time. So put them in a group, put them in a list, tag them, whatever your platform requires or lets you do to segment these disaster donors, you want to do that. And I think you know, depending on your platform, you may want 2 lists. You might want your existing donors who've given to this disaster, and then you may want just the new people separate. You want to track those new people over time, and maybe eventually they make it to the other list. But it'll be really important that you can identify them so that you can talk to them over time in a different way.
And the big reason why is we know even from other channels of giving that the larger their gifts, the more chance they have to convert or engage. So obviously the higher donation they give to you, the more involved or committed they are into solving that problem or that issue or for that program or service. And so as Jen said, you know, a lot of what we're seeing with the current crisis is more of those new donors are influxing online versus through your mail program. You know, but the idea from identification is, you know, when was the start point and then when is the end point, so that we can kind of look at the segmentation, because we know in every channel, you know, reaching the person at the right time with the right message and asking for the right amount is the key to fundraising. So again, identifying mid or major donors is key because they can help you close the gap and the shortfalls much quicker than someone who's giving you under $25. Some of this and foreshadowing to Friday's session, we'll be talking more about mid-major donors. But one thing we've realized with COVID is a lot of people have more free time at home, hence my gathering place sign behind me. And so reaching out with a phone call or touching them in a little bit different way because you have the time, because people aren't as distracted, you know, welcoming them to the organization and talking about why their gift is important. So again, these mid-major donors sometimes have the highest conversion rate, but also the quickest one as well.
And the mid-majors, the people who swoop in with their, if it's $100, $500, $1,000 gift, you definitely want to know that you know who they are, that you're going to pay attention to them, especially because in the long run, their gifts, they have the potential to give a lot more.
I think, obviously we want to welcome them with the language of COVID being the reason that they've given, but we obviously want to make sure that they learn about what you do every day. And sometimes, again, people that give based off of emotion don't have those ties to your organization that you otherwise would think they did. So looking at the acknowledgement being the most important part of why they gave their gift and what you're going to do with it, is the reason really that a person considers making their second gift. So just like any gift acknowledgement, it's important to make sure that you're recognizing them in a timely fashion and learning about your mission and how they can get more engaged. I think this speaks for itself. Ideally in a perfect world, we would talk to every donor in the way, shape, and form that they would want to be communicated with. With the volume of donors that are within your organization, sometimes that's not possible. But again, with the identification and segmentation, being intentional with how you reach them and what type of message is extremely important in any, not just a disaster-related giving, but any giving whatsoever. So in this case, this could be as simple as a postcard, in support of the crisis, so something that's quick and easy to try to get out as a touch point. Maybe after the acknowledgement, just to again to try to keep them engaged as an example.
Emails are great as well. You should say thank you. You should include some sort of link in there so that people can do a second gift if they want to. I know it's food banks and it's a little different than animal welfare, but we've seen a ton of success with our food banks who just had such incredible, generous giving. When they send out a thank you, people go and give again. So don't be afraid to put that. You don't have to put an ask in the message, but put a donate link, a help now somewhere on that email, because you're probably going to get somebody who's going to want to give again.
Even acknowledgement letters, we've made some recommendations to our partners about, changing the language, letting them know during this time where and how you need their help and why their gift is important. Yeah. And sometimes the acknowledgements seem as if they're the most trivial part of this, but they really are the foundation for why people consider giving a second gift. So now that we've acknowledged their first gift, the timing of when we would try to recommend to convert them to a core donor to the organization. So amazingly enough, from some of the data that we've done, and a lot of this was, constructed with some of our partners that have been through the disasters we spoke about, whether it's tornadoes or fires or hurricanes, looking at when those donors did convert to their second gift. So ironically enough, as Jen had said, asking right after they've given the first gift is fairly common. Getting them into the communication stream, we see almost 50% of people converted within 0 to 3 months. And then you'll see as you get farther away, they don't convert to the same rate. So again, it's looking at what types of communication streams you can have and how to engage them within that first 6 months to kind of get them into your donor file and engage them as a core donor.
And for animal welfare, especially when you've got animal rescue stories, emergency medical stories, anything with new animals coming in or out of the shelter that pull at the heartstrings, send those out. Include these new donors. Don't take them off just because somebody just gave. I mean, if they gave 2 days ago, maybe you can suppress some of those people, but don't take off everybody who gave in the last month, because you're missing out on this critical time period to get that second gift in the door.
And I do want to point out that even in the identification stage in other related disasters outside of COVID where everyone is affected, we do look at people that are giving outside of your market area and recommending that maybe they don't have the same type of communication stream. So for animal welfare, I sometimes relate that to the honor memorial type of gift, where a person is giving. So my aunt or uncle that live in Pennsylvania give to me because of the loss of our pet to our local organization. they're not going to be solicited or put in those communication streams because they're just not going to convert. So, the ROI that you're going to get trying to get my aunt and uncle to convert to my local organization is probably going to be non-existent. But again, with COVID, it's a little bit different because most of the people that are giving to your organizations are local. So looking at how do we get them into your communication stream as quick as possible.
And you may be adjusting some of the things you had planned to deal with COVID. Last year, Animal Rescue League of Iowa, we had a triple match campaign, midsummer, ready to go. And they had a huge hoarding case with cats. I think it was over 400 cats. Very, very sad story. This disaster is what it became, was in the news for almost a month's time. We pushed off the match campaign, several emails went out. And Caitlin, if you can go to the next one. So when it was time to do the match, we sent that out. It was about 2 months after the whole month had ended, or 2 weeks after. And 5% of the people who got this, who were new from the cat hoarding story, converted here. So about 4% made a one-time gift, and 1% actually became sustainers because they saw the value in the organization. So don't be afraid to follow up with campaigns and ask if you had to put something off, get the plan out there to send it again. You don't have to just totally change your plan entirely for something like COVID or another disaster that comes up. You might just have to push it off and wait. But matches and other campaigns might be a great opportunity for that second gift.
Obviously, connecting them to the crisis, because that's the offer that they came in with, so to speak, from the direct marketing world. And sometimes I equate this to an event donor. We know that you talk to your donors about events because that's how they've been engaged. And so the crisis is no different, making sure that you're tying the crisis to the communications that they received, because that's why they gave to you in the first place. Reminding them of their previous support. Again, I think some of these messages can come as they start to get longer with not responding or converting. So just, again, making sure that you're reminding them of the need. And especially now with COVID and it being open-ended to a certain extent, this is where it's extremely important. What we found just in talking with some of our partners and future partners for that matter, is the ones that have been successful to date in seeing that bump or that spike in revenue is because they've been out in the forefront of communication and they've been talking to their donors. And I think even one organization had a no communication, just saying, hey, there's no new updates, but here's what's still happening with us and here's why we need your help. So, being in the front and let the donor make the decision on what they want to engage or not engage with. But again, we've got a captive audience with a lot of our donors now because they're not out and about and they're not traveling. There's not as many distractions as there used to be. So people are reading your newsletters and people are reading the acknowledgement letters and absorbing more information than they had before. So those are all good reasons to kind of talk about what they've done for you. This is just a laundry list of potential communication touch points that you can, that you can try to engage within your organization. So obviously, thank you letters, using the telephone, whether you're making live phone calls or using robocalls to tell people what's happening, is always another good informational tool. We referenced the postcard a little bit earlier. There's an example of an impact report, whether that's something you sent out separately or within a newsletter to talk about, what's been happening. We've used a lot of buck slips and lift notes in the direct marketing side just to, quickly communicate and share numbers of what's happening. Jen can talk some of the digital things, but also the newsletters and donor renewals are communicating what their dollars are doing for you. Jen, you want to touch on some of the email communication points?
Sure. Email, as David said, impact reports, I think we have an example on the next one, are great. Let people know how their gift is being used. And then just regular, e-newsletters, e-appeals, whatever your needs are. And as David said, sending out an update that's just an update, it's fantastic too, especially if you're seeing higher open rates. As David said, everybody's, a lot of people are still working from home online more than usual. We did see a shift in the hours of the day when people donated for some of our food banks. Things that were either first thing in the morning or late at night tended to be very much across the day as people started staying at home. So you might want to look at, times you're sending things out. And if you normally sent it out at 7 in the morning, send it out 7 or 8, and then maybe try again in the afternoon with a resend if people didn't open it. It's impacted a lot of different things for messaging to look at. Text messaging, Arcadia did have one client who was in kind of in a remote location. It was really hard for them to get the physical mail when people were sending in their gifts. So they sent out a text message saying, it's really hard for us to get to the mail right now. Could you donate? And gave them a link, and they had a huge response by doing that. So even text messages, you should consider if you don't have a platform, go out and look for one. You don't want to be messaging every day with that, but that could be an option for volunteering if that becomes a thing that you need help with. Once people go back to work and schedules change, text could be a way to get a new channel in there and talk to people in a different way.
And Jen brings up a good point. It's not always about the dollars. I mean, we know that the dollars help us to do the things we need or put the money where we feel that the resource is best spent. And from my experience, that was always the easiest. But there are also other needs, and it could be volunteers, it could be supplies. There are other things where you can communicate and ask for help. So again, these are not just in a vacuum of asking for dollars. These are just different touch points on how you can communicate with your constituents. And you could use one or all of these if you need be.
And David, we didn't really talk about this before, but I've seen a lot of organizations who didn't really ever talk about having a pet pantry program, even though they did. That was the campaign that they rolled out with during COVID because they saw just this huge need for it. So I know some people created that if they didn't have one, but a lot of others, it was finally like time to send out those appeals. So if you have to, come up with a new program to support your community, I think those are a great opportunity to try to reach out to get new donors as well if you haven't tried those.
Yeah, and as we go to the next slide, just an important footnote on that. When we did the survey a couple years ago at a previous think tank, and Pet Pantry became probably 10th out of 13 items that donors were interested in, that's probably spiked now to one of the top 3 just because of what's happening in the environment. So being timely and it's important in messaging as well.
Yeah, this is just another example of an impact report that went out after Hurricane Harvey. And I would say digitally, people don't read a lot. And I know in this view, it looks like a lot of words, but icons, visuals, statistics are great. Bullet points so people can skim it and see if it's either by time when things happened or, pounds of food or number of animals helped or number of volunteers needed, whatever it is. Make it really easy for somebody to glance at these, because that's going to be the thing. They're going to see something and think, oh, that seems like a lot. I need to help them some more because they did so much. So, put the donate now button on these, but make them really easy for people to read.
So now we've gone through, just to kind of recap, we've identified folks that have kind of come in maybe as a first time with COVID or any disaster for that matter. We've looked at some communication touch points and trying to convert them at the various times, but what happens when you get down the road and you just don't see that those conversions are there? So this is where we always want to analyze and then resegment. And so I think Jen touched on it earlier, is you start seeing them, in one bucket not performing, to kind of keep, move them to another. And so we would recommend that even from the direct mail side, look at the 12, 13 month standpoint and see where people are in that process.
And digitally, 12 to 13 months, you'll want to start to look at least on your email platform, are these disaster donors still opening anything? If they're not, they're definitely dragging down your open rates. And they may, depending on how many you got during the disaster, could really be impacting the cost for your platform. So look at, are there more? Did they bump you up a new level? Can you archive those? Can you remove them? I think you want to have them available to you if the next disaster comes around, or you have a big animal case that you want to talk to them about. So try not to completely opt them out or remove them entirely, but if you can take them out of the platform at least to minimize the cost, 12 to 13 months is about when you want to think about doing that.
So obviously, if they're not responding, we want to try to move them to just different touch points. And so looking at them as maybe a warm prospect, again, whether it's digitally or through the mail, or whether you've had a relationship with them via telephone. Again, looking at them as a lapsed donor, and maybe even acquisition as well. And so looking at what type of packages do they get, what type of messaging, again, maybe some different conversion strategies, but the idea is you want to maximize your time and your return on your investment. And so making sure that there's no one size fits all to any of this. And so the idea is to make sure that you're looking at the data and making informed decisions on who you reach and when.
The language that you put in your communications that they're included in, the more you can segment them or make reference to, you helped us back when, you helped us, at a time of crisis, is going to be really important. That's going to help them recognize when they came around to helping you. I mean, I can't remember the emails I got last week. And if you're going to be emailing people or mailing them for the next 12 months, you're going to want to think about making that connection for them. But again, you want to, all of your channels, social, email, like the website in general, everywhere you can segment them, you should look for that opportunity at least once or twice to see if you can get them to reopen a message, make a second gift, stick around in some way to know, so they're still engaged.
And one of the charts that we show here is looking at when they reconvert. And again, the messaging could be an anniversary of when the hurricane came through, when things started, when the fire was. I think even for one of our partners with Superstorm Sandy, they did a 5-year kind of anniversary of what happened, and they saw, probably more donations from that than they had for any other challenge, throughout the last 3 years, and partly because, people remember those types of things. So, anniversaries, not only even for, for a new donor, but also a disaster donor, good time frame there for conversion. So again, just look at
while it's fresh in our minds, we should all start drafting our 1 year later anniversary COVID messages now, because we're all going to get them in our inboxes. There's going to be a lot of them. But I think, the way COVID has impacted so many organizations, your anniversary message is probably going to be something like, here's all the programs that were affected that are still affected. I mean, who knows, in some places, will it always have to be adoptions by appointment only? It could have some long-term impacts. And I would just say, start thinking about those things and how you might address them in that, 1 year anniversary time period. Because I do think that's going to be a touch point that's going to get people to come back or give again, just because there's going to be that wrap up of, going forward, here's what changed, or just how impacted you were at the time. So I would say take notes now, so that you can really get that in front of people.
And that's a good point, Jen. From being in the animal welfare industry, and you talk about cleanliness and the pandemic, and from a lot of people that I talk to that are hopefully still on this webinar, they had talked about, they weren't necessarily worried about the cleanliness or COVID within the shelters because of the cleaning protocols and how everything are. And so sometimes you take things for granted for what you normally would do or you find acceptable, but that your community or your constituents don't. So, so when cleaning protocols and the processes that you go through to make sure that the animals are well cared for, you do on a daily basis where some people don't realize that. So even telling that story can be impactful for making sure that, the health and safety of the animals and the people that are helping them are just key messaging points as well. All right, so our last question. They made fun of me because I only wanted one option here. Do you feel like you're more prepared? And again, as your partner, for a lot of you and for some of you that we're having conversations with, I mean, we want to be able to help you, through this process, not just now, but, as you move down the road and move forward. So we want your honest feedback here.
And I will say, everybody's digital platforms, your combinations may be a little different, so you're not sure how to segment or identify donors. So I don't think there's, one size fits all the time. And some people, depending on where you are in the country, may be more or less affected. So hopefully this just gives you a little guidance for what you may need to do.
Okay, who's the person that said no? Is that one of my team members? I'm just kidding. Obviously, we appreciate all of you, kind of coming to visit this webinar. I think, again, for us, it's breaking things down and looking at, for the first standpoint, we know disaster donors aren't the same as even event donors or direct mail donors or digital donors. They're less. But how can we lift that and get them to convert to give more down the road and engage with the organization? And so, by doing that, only helps the organization grow revenue. You won't see that big dip the following year as we see with folks that go through hurricanes or fires or other natural disasters. So again, from a budgeting standpoint, it makes you a little more pliable and flexible because the money is more sustainable. So hopefully this was helpful for you today. We appreciate your time. If there's any other feedback, I think most of you know how to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear it. And if there's anything else that we can do for you, we greatly appreciate it.
And if you've got questions, you can type them in the question box, and we've got some time now.
We got nothing but time. So just to give you a preview of some of the other things that are coming up this week for the think tank. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing kind of digital roundtables. So it's a chance to have some breakout sessions and talk about kind of what's worked with COVID, what hasn't, and learn from each other, so that you can become successful. But really, it's a forum for all of you to kind of converse with your peers, since we don't have the conference setting. Wednesday, talking about acquiring donors during the downturn. We know that new donors sustain growth, and it puts less strain on trying to get more from your current donors. So, what are some ways that we can do that? Group Thinkers Live, so it's kind of a Q&A with Erica, and her focus is really going to be on monthly donors and monthly sustaining programs. So hopefully you can kind of drop by for that. And then Friday is MidMajor Donors, just some tips and tricks again on how we can try to engage them and really grow that program, since we know that's where a lot of the lion's share of the revenue is. The link at the bottom to register, forward it to other staff members that you might feel appropriate. The more the merrier. Again, we're kind of happy to be able to have this forum. We wish this could be in person, but appreciate all of you kind of coming out today. Are there any other questions, or Caitlin, has anybody popped in?
Oh, we don't have any questions right now. If anybody has any questions, we have a little bit more time to answer a few questions.
All right, well, email us. We're around. Text David, though. He likes a text message.
Yeah, love text. I see people dropping off, so that would lead me to believe there's probably no further questions. Again, thank you on behalf of everyone with RKD and the Animal Welfare Group. We appreciate all of the things that you're doing. Continue to be positive forces in your community, and thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.